You always were the weak link, Ethan, and now everybody finally sees it. My cousin Aaron's voice cracked like a whip across the echoing hall of the country club, his words sharpened by the smug grin plastered on his face as he raised his glass. And the scattered applause and laughter that followed cut into me like glass shards. Strangers and so-called family members leaning back in their seats, whispering, smirking, enjoying the spectacle of me being dressed down in public, as if I were some washed-up fraud who had gotten lucky once and was now exposed. And though my throat burned with the taste of humiliation, I said nothing, because in that instant I knew silence would wound him deeper than anything I could say. Before we get deeper into this story, make sure you're subscribed, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 38 years old, born and raised in Dayton, Ohio, though work carried me far and wide before I found my footing back home. And if you'd seen me that night, sitting there in my tailored Navy suit with my jaw set, you might have thought I was paralyzed by the cruelty of what was unfolding. But I wasn't, because buried beneath the sharp sting of Aaron's performance was a thought that grounded me. He had no idea about the one thing I had kept hidden all these years, the one thing he couldn't steal, couldn't forge, couldn't twist into his narrative. I'll get to that later, but for now understand this. I wasn't born with wealth. I clawed my way toward it. Nights spent pouring coffee into my veins while coding on a busted Dell in my one-bedroom apartment above a pawn shop on Main Street. Mornings loading boxes at the FedEx hub to keep the lights on. Years in which every dollar that passed through my hands was wrung out of blood, sweat, and willpower. Aaron had none of that in him. He was the golden nephew, the one my aunt and uncle paraded around, quick with jokes, better with lies, the kind of man who never built anything of his own, but always managed to sit at the head of someone else's table. And for reasons I'll admit I never fully understood. My own father had believed in him almost more than he believed in me. That night, Aaron stood in front of everyone I knew, claiming I had mishandled the family trust, accusing me of gambling away assets, flashing doctored documents that made me look like the architect of my family's ruin. And though my instinct was to rise, to shout the truth, to tell them all how Aaron had siphoned money through shell companies and manipulated my father into signing over control before the old man's mind slipped for good, I just pressed my thumb into the old silver coin I kept in my pocket, a Warren Kennedy $50 my father had given me when I was 12, telling me, "This is your reminder, son. Never trade integrity for quick gain." That coin had stayed with me through lean years and victories alike, and as my cousin basked in the spotlight of his lies, I felt the grooves against my skin and thought, he has no idea that coin is more than a keepsake. It's the key to undoing him when the time comes. You might wonder how it reached this point, how two boys raised on the same Midwestern streets ended up as enemies in a hall where laughter felt heavier than lead, and for that you'd have to understand the years of quiet rot that led here. Aaron and I had grown up together, and in the early days he wasn't all bad. He was the one dragging me out to the cornfields in summer nights to chase fireflies, the one who dared me to jump from the quarry cliffs into the cold water below, the one who taught me how to bluff at poker with a grin that made even my mother laugh, but as we grew older the cracks widened. Where I pushed myself through community college, and then the endless grind of startup life, he learned shortcuts, leveraging charm into small cons, slipping out of debts with a wink and a promise that never came true, and by the time I was building a software company that eventually sold for 7 figures, he was already sniffing around my life like a wolf looking for weakness. The night my father suffered his first stroke, Aaron was the first one in the hospital room, whispering assurances, steering the conversation toward protecting the family assets. And I should have known then what he was plotting, but loyalty blinds you. It makes you see what you want to see, not what's really in front of you. So when Dad, frail and confused, handed over power of attorney to Aaron just until Ethan can catch his breath, I didn't fight it. I told myself I'd earned Dad's trust already, that the truth would stand longer than Aaron's charm. I didn't imagine he'd go so far as to frame me, to orchestrate a public takedown, to turn people I'd bled for against me. Yet there I was, his words ringing in my ears, his hand squeezing my shoulder as though he were the benevolent victor, leaning down close enough for only me to hear, "You built the fire. Cousin, I just let it burn." I clenched the coin tighter, its cold surface grounding me, and in that silence I made a promise. He thought he had won tonight, but I wasn't going to let this story end with me broken and forgotten. What Aaron didn't know, what no one in that room could guess, was that I had already begun laying a trap long before he started weaving his lies, and when it finally snapped shut, he'd realized too late that I wasn't the weak link. I was the blade hidden in plain sight. And that was the last thought I held onto as I excused myself from the table, nodding politely at whispers that followed me toward the exit, the heavy wooden doors of the club shutting behind me with a hollow thud that sounded almost like a starting gun, because in that instant I understood the war had begun and Aaron had no idea he'd just handed me the perfect battlefield to destroy him. The morning after that humiliation at the country club, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing with messages, some from old acquaintances pretending to check in, others laced with thinly veiled glee, as they forwarded me headlines from the local paper. Coal Air accused of fraud trust mismanaged. The bold black letters screaming my cousin's narrative into every corner of Dayton. And though the sting of seeing my name dragged through the mud cut deeper than I wanted to admit, I forced myself to sit at the kitchen table, sip the bitter black coffee I'd brewed, and remind myself that perception wasn't truth. Not yet anyway. I had learned years ago, in the cutthroat early days of business, that people loved a downfall story almost more than a success one, and Aaron was milking that appetite with precision, holding little informal gatherings with family where he positioned himself as the reluctant savior cleaning up my mess. And the worst part was, they believed him. My own aunt, his mother, left me a voicemail dripping with venom. "Ethan, I don't know how you could do this to your father's legacy, but thank God Aaron is here to restore order." And though I wanted to smash the phone against the wall, I only pressed my thumb against the silver coin in my pocket, feeling its grooves anchor me in the storm. That coin wasn't just a reminder of my father's words, never trade integrity for quick gain. It was leverage, though Aaron couldn't possibly suspect it, not yet. So I let them talk, let Aaron spin his web tighter, even when he announced to the family that he was moving into my father's house to ensure its care, as if he hadn't manipulated Dad into signing the deed over months ago. That house wasn't just brick and wood, it was the heart of our family, the place where every Thanksgiving since 1985 had been carved into memory, and seeing him parade around in it, drinking bourbon on the porch swing that used to creak under Dad's weight, made bile rise in my throat. But I kept my mask in place. I visited quietly, checking on Dad in his weakened state, bringing him his favorite lemon bars from the bakery on Fifth, reading him passages from Steinbeck when his hands trembled too much to hold the book himself. And though his eyes sometimes flickered with confusion, there were moments, fleeting, fragile, when he'd grip my wrist and whisper, "Don't let him win, son." That was all the permission I needed. Meanwhile, Aaron tightened control, freezing me out of accounts, sending letters through lawyers, threatening to investigate me for fiduciary negligence. And each document was another attempt to break me, to make me fold. But I'd played this kind of game before, only the stakes were higher now because blood was mixed in with the ink. Outwardly, I looked broken. The family pitied me or mocked me, depending on their mood, and Aaron relished that image, calling me washed-up Ethan when he thought I wasn't listening. But beneath that facade, I was moving pieces he didn't even know were on the board. The first small crack in his armor came 2 weeks later when I attended a family dinner he organized at Dad's house, where he made a grand show of sitting at the head of the table, raising a toast to a new chapter, and distributing glossy pamphlets for some real estate venture he claimed would double the family's wealth. Most nodded, dazzled by his rehearsed pitch, but I noticed the way his hand shook slightly when he set his glass down, the faint sweat on his temple even though the November air outside had chilled the windows, and I knew then he was overextended. Too many debts, too many promises made to the wrong people. I didn't call him out, not yet. I just leaned back, tracing the coin in my pocket, letting him think I was shrinking. After dinner, while everyone buzzed about his big plans, I slipped upstairs to Dad's study, a place Aaron rarely bothered to enter because he thought the old man's clutter was useless. The scent of tobacco lingered there, mixed with dust and pine from the shelves, and I knelt by the bottom drawer where Dad had once shown me a false panel, a trick from his days working as a carpenter, before the factory job consumed him. Behind that panel was a folder, one I had placed there myself months earlier, containing copies of every document, every ledger, every recorded conversation I quietly collected about Aaron's dealings. See, while he thought I was too busy with my company and my life to notice his schemes, I had been building a shadow record because deep down I knew men like him couldn't resist betrayal, and I wanted to be ready when the time came. As I touched the folder, my pulse steadied. Because I understood the power of patience, timing was everything. Still, even with that secret arsenal, his moves began to press harder. A week after the dinner, I received a notice from his attorney stating that unless I repaid a fabricated loan of $500,000, complete fiction, based on his doctored records, he would petition the court to seize my personal assets. It was a bold bluff, and for a moment it rattled me, made me taste metal at the back of my throat as I stared at the paper under the dim kitchen light. But then I smiled, because only a desperate man bluffs that loudly. I filed it away without a response, knowing silence would gnaw at him more than any counterstrike, and I focused instead on preparing the ground. I met with a few trusted friends from my startup days, people who owed me favors or simply believed in me enough to risk quiet loyalty, and we began reconstructing the trail that would expose him, but carefully, always carefully, because if he caught wind of it too soon, he'd bury evidence deeper than a Midwest winter buries cornstalks. For now, I let the world think he was winning, and in many ways, he was. He threw another party, this time at the house, showing off the renovations he'd commissioned. New hardwood floors, chandeliers in the dining room, and when someone joked about how I must be jealous, he laughed louder than anyone, clapping me on the back with that oily grin. Outwardly, I joined in, but inside I pictured the look on his face when the truth surfaced, when the walls of that stolen house closed in on him. But then came a setback I hadn't anticipated, one that nearly shook my plan apart. My father, in one of his more lucid moments, confronted Aaron directly, telling him, "This house isn't yours to claim. It's Ethan's blood that kept us afloat." And within a week, Dad suffered another sudden fall down the staircase. The doctor said it was an accident, but I saw the smug calm in Aaron's face when he explained it to the family, the way he glossed over details, the faint smirk curling his lip when he caught me staring. Dad survived, barely, but his mind slipped further, and I knew then Aaron had crossed a line from manipulation into something darker. For the first time, doubt wormed into me. What if he really had the stomach for worse? What if patience gave him time to push again, harder? That night I sat alone in my truck in the driveway, staring at the porch light flickering in the cold wind, gripping the coin until it left an imprint in my palm. And I whispered into the dark, "Not much longer, Dad. Not much longer." And that's when I realized the game wasn't just about reclaiming money or property anymore. It was about survival, about legacy, about proving that integrity outlasts deceit. Aaron thought he had tightened the noose around me, but what he didn't know was that I had been weaving another rope altogether, one that would soon pull him down, and though the timeline had shifted, though danger had sharpened, the plan was still alive, still waiting. As I drove away from the house that night, taillights casting a red glow on the frost-bitten road, I knew the next move would be mine, and for the first time in weeks I almost welcomed the storm ahead. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope over black water, every step measured, every breath deliberate, because I knew Aaron was circling closer, convinced he had me cornered, while in truth I was drawing him into the trap I'd been stitching together for months, a trap built not on brute force but on patience, documentation, and the arrogance that blinded him to details he thought beneath him. And though the weight of my father's decline pressed on me like a stone, I forced myself to channel that pain into precision. He moved fast, selling off small parcels of family land without consulting anyone, bragging about investments that were about to pay off big, and each announcement spread like wildfire through the family, strengthening his image as the savior, while I stayed silent, letting him burn brighter, letting him think the spotlight was his forever. What he didn't realize was that I had placed small, almost invisible threads around each of those transactions, quiet filings and notarized statements that recorded his overreach, and the deeper he dug, the more entangled he became. To the outside world, I looked like a beaten man. I even stopped shaving for a while, letting the stubble shadow my jaw, wearing old hoodies to gatherings so they could whisper about how far I'd fallen, and Aaron basked in it, grinning wide, telling anyone who'd listen that I was finally showing my true self. But behind that mask of defeat, I was spending long nights in Dad's study, poring over the folders hidden behind the false panel, piecing together timelines, cross-referencing his shell companies with wire transfers that led not to family accounts, but to offshore holdings. The symbolic weight of the coin in my pocket grew heavier with every discovery, reminding me of Dad's words about integrity, and I began to see the coin not just as memory, but as a kind of compass pointing me toward the inevitable moment when truth would cut through the lies. A deadline emerged that sharpened everything. Aaron announced a grand family celebration at the house, Time to coincide with what he claimed would be the official relaunch of the family trust, with him as trustee. And though the invitations dripped with generosity, a night of unity and legacy, I heard the real message underneath. This was his coronation, the moment he wanted stamped into family lore as the night Ethan was erased. Everyone would be there. Cousins from Chicago, uncles from Kentucky, even old family friends who hadn't set foot in Dayton in decades. And Aaron relished the spectacle, already strutting around like a king in exile restored to the throne. That event became my deadline too, the point where the threads I'd woven would tighten all at once. But until then, I had to play the role of beaten dog. The pressure was suffocating at times. Dad's health slipped further, his voice growing weaker, his eyes clouded more often than clear, and one night when I read him from Of Mice and Men, he reached out blindly for my hand, whispering, "Don't let him take it all," before drifting into shallow sleep, and I knew I couldn't fail, not just for me, but for him, for the man who had given me the coin and the lessons that still steered me when the world spun off its axis. In the week leading up to the celebration, I deliberately let slip small signs of collapse. I called Aaron one afternoon, pretending panic, telling him creditors were on me, that I might be forced to sell what little remained, and though I could almost hear the smirk stretching across his face, he played it cool, telling me, "Don't worry, cousin. I'll take care of what's left. Hand it over and I'll keep you from embarrassment." And I could barely keep my voice steady as I mumbled gratitude, because I knew I had just baited him into overconfidence. The next day, one of his associates, a slick man with a too-thin tie, cornered me outside the courthouse, pressing me to sign a document that would have relinquished my stake in a piece of property I knew Aaron was desperate for, and though I pretended to hesitate, I walked away, letting them believe I was stalling only out of pride. What they didn't know was that I'd already filed injunctions with the county clerk, quiet and precise, documents that would later reveal just how far Aaron had pushed beyond his authority. The more he schemed, the more rope he pulled into his own hands, and I only had to wait until the night he tied the knot himself. Yet even as my plan advanced, shadows grew. One evening, I caught Aaron watching me from the porch of the house, a glass of bourbon in his hand, his smile too still, too sharp, and for a fleeting second I wondered if he suspected something, if he could sense the quiet currents moving against him, and a chill crawled down my spine, because men like him, cornered and suspicious, can be unpredictable, even dangerous. The night of the celebration arrived with a bitter wind blowing across Dayton, the kind of cold that makes breath hang like ghosts in the air, and as I drove down Main Street toward the house, past the shuttered shops and the glowing neon of the diner where Dad once took me for pie after Little League, my hands tightened on the steering wheel, not out of fear, but out of the weight of what was about to happen. The driveway was full when I pulled up, cars lined along the curb, the house glowing warm against the winter dark, music spilling faintly from inside. I stepped through the front door and felt every eye turn. Whispers, murmurs, smirks. And at the center of it all, Aaron, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, arms spread like a host welcoming guests to his palace. He raised a glass when he saw me, his grin wide, his voice booming. "Ah, there's Ethan. Good of you to show, cousin. Maybe you'll finally see how real men handle legacy." Laughter rippled around the room that I didn't bite. I only nodded, slipping the silver coin from my pocket to rub its grooves, feeling the steadiness it gave me. I watched as he made a speech, weaving stories about sacrifice and vision, painting himself as the loyal steward who had stepped in when I failed, and the applause thundered, echoing off the walls I had once run my hands across as a boy, and for a moment the humiliation of the country club replayed, sharp and raw. But this time I didn't feel small. I felt the coil of inevitability tightening because hidden in the very speech he was giving were contradictions I had seeded weeks ago, discrepancies between his words and the filings I had quietly made with the county, and the more he bragged, the deeper he buried himself. Then came the moment that changed everything, the mini-reveal that shifted the night. As Aaron passed out glossy brochures for his new venture, detailing land he claimed the family now controlled, one of the uncles frowned, flipping through pages before muttering aloud, "Wait, this parcel here, I thought Ethan still held title on that." The room quieted, eyes turning between me and Aaron, who chuckled too quickly, waving it off as clerical delay. But I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes, the smallest crack in the mask. I said nothing, just smiled faintly, because that question, small, almost dismissed, was the seed I needed planted in their minds, the beginning of doubt. Aaron regained control quickly, deflecting, making another joke at my expense, and the laughter resumed, but I knew the shift had occurred. The trap was primed, the noose nearly ready, and as I slipped the coin back into my pocket, I thought of Dad lying upstairs, frail and fading, and I whispered to myself, just one more night, one more step, and it will all come down on him. And as the celebration carried on, music rising, glasses clinking, the smell of roast beef and bourbon thick in the air, I moved silently through the room, unnoticed, already picturing the moment when the truth would slam into Aaron with the force of a hammer, when every smug grin he'd worn would curdle into disbelief, and though he thought this was his crowning night, I knew better, it was the stage I had built for his downfall. The celebration was still buzzing when Aaron clinked his glass again, calling for silence as though he were already king, his voice swelling with practiced grandeur, thanking everyone for their faith, promising them a new era of prosperity under his guidance. And I watched the way people leaned in, soaking up his performance, hungry for someone to follow. And I realized how much a power is nothing but theater, smoke, and spotlight, but what he didn't know was that the curtain was about to drop. I waited until his final words, "Tonight we celebrate not just survival, but rebirth," echoed through the hall. And then I stepped forward, slow, deliberate, feeling the silver coin warm in my palm, the same coin Dad had pressed into my hand decades ago. And when Aaron caught sight of me moving, he smirked, raising his glass as if to toast my defeat, but his smile faltered when he saw I wasn't shrinking. "You've done quite a show, cousin," I said, my voice calm, steady, slicing through the murmurs. "But before we crown you the savior, maybe we should take a closer look at what you've actually built." A few heads turned, curiosity sparking, and I reached into my coat, pulling out a thick folder, the very one I'd hidden behind the false panel in Dad's study, each page a nail for Aaron's coffin. I laid it on the table with a quiet thud, the sound somehow louder than his applause had been, and the room hushed, the crackle of the fireplace the only noise. "These are records," I continued, flipping open the folder so the nearest relatives could see. "Documents filed with the county, notarized statements, recordings, showing not only that Aaron siphoned assets through shell companies, but that he used the Dad's weakened state to forge transfers, and that every investment he's bragging about tonight is propped up by debt he never intends to repay." A ripple went through the crowd, some gasps, some mutters, and Aaron laughed too loudly, too fast, reaching for bravado. "Don't listen to him. He's desperate. He's spinning lies because he can't handle losing." But his voice cracked on the last word, and I pressed the coin harder, steadying myself, because this was the moment. I didn't stop there. From my pocket, I drew a small USB drive and held it up. "And since I know you'd say these papers were forged, I made sure to back them with audio," I said, clicking it into the laptop I'd set on the table before anyone arrived, the screen glowing blue against the dim room. The speakers filled with Aaron's voice, recorded weeks earlier when he'd gotten drunk on the porch, bragging to one of his cronies about how easy it was to manipulate the old man and how soon he'd have Ethan crawling on his knees. The words hung in the air like smoke, undeniable, poisonous, and when the recording ended, silence crashed down. For a moment, no one moved. Then murmurs swelled into outrage, uncles cursing, aunts shaking their heads, cousins glaring at him as though seeing him for the first time, and Aaron's mask shattered, his eyes wild, his grin gone, the sweat breaking through his powdered face. He lunged for the laptop, shouting, "It's fake! It's all fake!" But I stepped in his path, meeting his eyes with a calm I hadn't felt in months, and I whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "You forgot one thing, cousin. I don't trade integrity for gain." "You do, and that's why you'll always lose." But here's where the twist came, the first one. Exposing him publicly wasn't the true victory, because while everyone was reeling, while Aaron stammered and tried to spin, I revealed the deeper layer I'd kept buried, that in the months of quietly building my record, I had already handed everything to the state attorney's office. Investigators who had been waiting for this exact night to see him bury himself with lies. Right on cue, headlights cut across the windows, doors opened, and two plainclothes officers stepped in, flashing badges, their presence as sudden and sharp as a blade, and the room gasped as Aaron's bravado dissolved into panic. "This is harassment!" "He set me up," he shouted, but the officers ignored him, reciting his rights as they clasped cuffs around his wrists. And in that moment, the image of him, suit rumpled, face red, struggling against the steel that bound him, seared itself into family memory, not as the savior, but as the thief exposed in his own temple. People parted, whispering, pointing, shaking their heads, and Aaron's mother sobbed quietly in the corner while he was dragged toward the door, his cries echoing down the hall. That was the justice everyone saw. That was the fall. But the second twist, the one no one but me would ever fully understand, was rooted in that coin. After the officers left, after the family began piecing together their shock, I stayed behind in the quiet, slipping into Dad's study where the old man lay dozing in his armchair, blanket over his frail body. I pressed the coin into his hand, the one he'd given me all those years ago, and whispered, "It's done, Dad. He won't take anything else from us." His eyes fluttered open for a moment, clear for the first time in weeks, and he smiled faintly, whispering, "Integrity, son. You kept it." But what no one else knew, not even Dad, was that the coin had been more than symbolic. Etched inside its case so faint you'd miss it without knowing to look, was a code I'd engraved years earlier, the key to a digital vault where I'd stored copies of every document, every recording, every breadcrumb that led to Aaron's undoing. That tiny object, carried in my pocket through humiliation and doubt, had been the seed of his destruction, the secret advantage I'd hinted at from the start. He thought it was just a trinket, a reminder of a sentimental father, but it was the blade he never saw. As the house emptied and the cold night pressed in, I stood on the porch alone, the wood creaking under my weight, and for the first time in months I let myself breathe. The humiliation at the country club, the whispers, the threats, the pain of watching my father diminished, all of it had led here, to this moment of quiet where justice had been served not with rage, but with patience, precision, and integrity. Aaron's empire of lies had collapsed under its own weight, and though my name had been dragged through mud, the truth had risen, clear and undeniable. I wasn't naive enough to think the road ahead would be easy. Trials, paperwork, rebuilding trust with family, but none of that mattered as much as the freedom that coursed through me now, the release of carrying truth instead of secrets. And as I flicked the coin into the air, catching it in the palm where the grooves had worn deep, I realized the true revenge wasn't in seeing him cuffed, or in hearing his cries fade. It was in knowing that he had destroyed himself chasing power, while I had held steady with the one thing he never understood. Integrity isn't traded. It's carried like a coin worn smooth by years, waiting for the moment when it shines again. If you enjoyed this story, please give a thumbs up to the video and consider subscribing to the channel for more powerful true life stories.